Good evening to everybody. Usually I speak in Hebrew, even though English, I am much better in English. Even one of my students, I heard, is here, former students. So we'll see how it goes in English, even though, as I said, now they speak mostly in Hebrew. As you heard, I'm a psychologist, been here in Israel for 30 years. And over the past few years, besides all the academic things that I do, I've been involved in understanding the single scene, okay? Scene is a bad word. What's going on? And just maybe, first I'll give you the topics I'm going to talk about, and then give you some data, and then give you some of my comments on it. I want to talk a little bit, start with a little Devar Torah. I'd like to also comment if some of you saw or heard indirectly what Shirley Botella wrote in the newspaper the other day, and I'll give you my take on it. I want to talk about some ideas in general about men and women in all spheres. I'm going to talk a little bit about power. Then I'm going to talk about a concept which I want, power meaning how you persuade people to do things. And secondly, I want to talk about, finally, I want to talk about a concept called upspeak. Has any of you heard of this? Okay, it's a really interesting concept, and I can speak a lot about that. I want to end with that. Okay. First of all, I thought the interesting place in the Torah for a discussion on communication is Rivka and Yitzchak. Okay? And I want to try to follow a traditional line and not use any of my interpretations, except maybe a little bit, but trying to understand their relationship is really a study in communication. Rivka comes to Yitzchak, and if you remember, she falls off her camel. Okay, why? The Mefarshim tell us that she fell off the camel because she was in such awe of Yitzchak. Okay, remember she's going to marry this man. Machloka, there's an argument how old she is. I don't want to get into that. That would really confuse the whole thing. But the opinion that one person has, not everyone's opinion. So you can have different opinions on how old she is. But the part that's even more interesting, remember, she's in awe of the man she's about to marry. And then you see the communication during their marriage. As a matter of fact, there's very little dialogue during their marriage, at least in the Torah. Okay, that's just a fact. And then you see something which is really unbelievable. The whole story with how she sees Yaakov and Esav, and how her husband sees Yaakov and Esav. A question that I'm asking again, just for thought, is did they ever discuss this? Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says clearly that Yitzchak may have made a mistake. In what way? That Chanoch nar ledarko. What does that mean? That perhaps if Yitzchak had understood Esav more correctly, he could have channeled Esav's particular behavior pattern, okay, into something positive. In other words, and this is in the discussion that goes on in Israel today, not everybody has to sit and learn, okay? And perhaps somebody, Yaakov was very happy, went afterwards to yeshiva to learn for many years, but maybe if Yitzchak had understood Yaakov as being different than Esav being different than Yaakov, which the mother did understand. The mother understood it clearly when she helps Yaakov disguise himself and come in front of her husband and get a bracha. The whole thing in terms of communication, again, I don't want beyond what Hirsch says and Mefarshim say about Rivka falling off her camel. I don't want to get into it and trying to explain it psychologically. I just want to give you the facts, the way I see it. And there is some tension, it seems, between the way Rivka and Yitzhak see their children, and where is the communication? Where do they talk about it? Which is, food for thought. Okay, what did Shirley Botella talk about the other day? Shirley Botella the other day in the newspaper had an article that was somewhat provocative, I would say. Provocative both in his intention and the text. Shirley Botella seems to say that women want to be lusted. Okay? In other words, a woman is looking for a man who will lust after her. That's the way Shirley Botella sees, and he gives all sorts of, not so much research, but his opinion of what a woman really wants. Okay? I'm not going to say there aren't women who want to be lusted or men who want to be lusted, but the research seems to indicate that men and women on this particular area, there are differences, but I wouldn't say that this is the main focus in their and how they see the world or how they see the opposite sex. It's true that research seems to indicate that women look for relationships. In other words, when they're younger in particular, they're looking for relationships. And what arouses the woman is really being able to talk to somebody that she has a relationship with. The men, however, research seems to indicate when they're young, men are looking often for a very, let's say, physical thing. A woman's picture or body might be stimulating for the man. But the research is fascinating here. As they both get older, they move over a little bit to the other side. Women, as they get older, and perhaps because of satisfying relationships, want that physical part of their contact with men. And men, as they get older, are looking for relationships, not only the body image, but also a relationship with somebody. It doesn't maybe cross over completely that the men become like women and women become like men, but they become much closer to each other. So, I don't know, Shirley Botella maybe wanted to give a message, which I think is the purpose sometimes of his articles, is to give some type of message. I wasn't clear exactly what the message was. Okay. Let's talk some general things about men and women, what we know in psychology today. First of all, a very interesting fact is no matter what you're going to hear from me or anybody else, nearly all the research shows one particular fascinating aspect. Even where men and women differ, and I'm going to show you some things that they differ in, and you'll hear from some of the other speakers also, the variability within men or within women is greater than the difference between them. What does that mean? That means there are women who are much more on anything we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, obviously, you think women emote more, right? That would be a thought that people have. Well, believe it or not, there are men who emote much more than the average woman. Okay? And then you're going to think, well, women are more interested in facts. Okay? I'm sorry, men. Men are more interested. Men are, when they try to solve problems, they try to solve problems by looking at the facts. That's in the literature all over the place, okay? Again, there are men who are much more emotional than the average woman. What does that mean? That any differences that you see are group differences. Anything you're going to hear are really differences between groups, men and women, okay? And there's a tendency a little bit on one side or the other. But there are men who are just like women in terms of their behavior and feelings and thoughts, and the opposite is true too. So, nevertheless, you're going to hear some differences, but just be aware of that. That's the first. Second, let's talk about things that relate to all young people and even older people. Intelligence, okay? What can we say? Are men smarter than women? Are women smarter than men? Well, maybe you know this already. There's really no difference between men and women. The only two differences, I would say, that are consistent is men do a little bit better in mathematics, okay, and not a whole lot. And women are also a little bit weaker in certain types of spatial relations. The psychometry, which you all know what that is, right? In Israel, like the SAT or College Board of the United States. In the psychometry, once upon a time, I sit on the board of the psychometry, at least a part of it, okay? The psychometry used to have spatial relations in it, and it was knocked out because it was somewhat biased against women. Okay, so there's no reason to ask questions that the women have more difficulty with. Recently, even that difference has become less. There's a test, an IQ test, called the Raven's Progressive Matrices. It has no math in it. Okay, it's seeing analogies of figures. Not so much spatial relations, but figures, okay? In other words, a little circle is to a big circle, as a little rectangle is to a big rectangle, okay? And more complicated ones than that. There's no difference between men and women in that test, which is supposedly, it's not really a culture-free test. In other words, it's not based upon any cultural difference. In a book by Eleanor Maccabee in the year 1972, she writes the following, which I'm sure is not true of any, I hope, of any of your parents or any of the experiences that you will have in the future when you have children. She describes this story. Two children come home to parents, okay, a boy and a girl. The boy comes home and tells the mother, I got a 90 on my math test. Okay? And what do the parents say? Oh, a doctor, an engineer, accountant maybe, okay? All these great things, right? And when the girl comes home and says she got a 90 on the test, what do the parents say? Well, are you still talking to Rachel in the back of the room there? You know? Do the kids like you in class? What are you doing outside? And the kid says, but Ma, I got the same mark as my brother. And the mother asks questions about her relationships with children, with her friends. Is she popular? Did she look good today in class when she, wore her new skirt or whatever? The questions and the cultural emphasis is so clear. Today, when I ask the same thing that I'm telling you, I ask my class, I don't think there's anybody who would today, I think, would denigrate or not consider their daughter's achievement in math or any other area as equal to their son. I mean, hard to believe. Okay, would even like to look at that in a let's say a Haredi crowd. I have a feeling even there would also not be that distinction that used to be once upon a time. In other words, acceptance of your daughter's abilities and skills gives you a good feeling, whether it's a girl or a boy. Okay, so this is some of the general research that has been going on. Let me tell you a story, okay? This is the story. I'm really tired. I have so much work to do. I don't know how I'll get it done. Me too. There just aren't enough hours in the day. He, there you go again. You never think my contributions to this marriage are good enough. In a recent article in 2000, this comes from an article in 2013, the author wants to say something very interesting. Okay, the author is saying that the man, in his response, what is he saying? He obviously didn't hear what his wife, girlfriend, is saying. Okay, the girlfriend is saying, "Listen, I'm with you. I share your tiredness, your not enough hours in the day to do all the things." What does he hear? He hears, "What you're competing with me? Who's more tired? Who's got to do more in those hours in the day?" In other words, he hears a different message than she. You all saw it. You all heard it, right? But this, the author writes, this is not atypical in relationships. In other words, the man and the woman, when they're communicating to each other, they're communicating not towards each other, but above or below. One is above or one is below. It's not that he's the bad guy only in the story, okay? She didn't get across, even though the sentence is so, me too, there's just not enough hours in the day, is a very parva sentence in terms of not relating to the husband. It's trying to share, okay? But she didn't realize, okay, that he may not see it that way, that they're both, she's competing with him in tiredness, in hours of the day. A communication problem, okay? And often what happens is this type of thing. A woman will try to empathize and feel for the man, and the man may not hear that empathy. And what it may need sometimes, something like this, that she then has to say, okay, no, I'm not competing with you. I'm not trying to make myself more or less than you in terms of tiredness. In other words, she needs to somehow communicate to him that she's with him, not competing. Men in communications often try to show some status that they're at. Higher status, lower, well, they don't want to be at a lower status. We'll talk in a few minutes, if I have still time, about 5 minutes. Okay. Okay. Let me give you some particular aspects of relationships or psychological variables that exist in just short. Again, everything I'm saying comes from research. Empathy. Women score higher on empathy. Okay, you know what empathy is? It's sympathy plus. It's not only, boy, I know you're sick, but also saying, I know how it feels to be sick. Empathy is the next level. Women score higher. The question is, and this is such an exciting question today because we have all sorts of research being done neurologically, okay? The question is this really innate in women to be more empathetic than men? Or is this something that we expect from women? We expect the women, they're the mothers. Still today, women are mothers, right? It's still not changed, though who knows what's going to happen. I asked my class the other day in an article that they're going to replace the brain by the year 2050. If they replace the brain of a man with a woman's brain, what is he? Okay. We don't have time to discuss this. I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that I've done, and maybe during the question and answers we'll talk about more issues. I've done a lot of research on power. Very interesting. How does a man influence a woman, and how does a woman influence a man? Okay? And the research that we've done has always been where there's a conflict. In other words, he wants to buy a Ford, and she wants to buy a Toyota. Okay? How do they convince each other? And there's a lot of techniques, and time is short. The techniques that we found were the following. Let's say if it's a car in particular, okay, the woman, and this goes against what you would think from the emotional thing, she brings facts. She'll say, you know, the Toyota has a safety rating of 5 stars. The Toyota gets 21 kilometers per liter. The Toyota da-da-da. And what does he say? He wants a Ford. He says, a car? You're telling me what we should buy? A Toyota? I want a Ford. And that's what we're buying. We're buying a Ford. In other words, the man and the woman on this is very interesting. When trying to persuade the other, it's really interesting. Women will use facts, not emotions. You know, cry, please let's buy a Toyota. No, she will bring facts. And what does he bring? Authority. We are buying a Ford or whatever, okay? And we've done this in so many different connections, unbelievable differences here, men and women, on how they talk to each other in convincing. I just want to finish with this idea of upspeak, which is fascinating. This was originally started by some researcher, an academic, a professor. He called a student up to speak, a female student, okay? And when she spoke with question marks at the end of the sentences. What did she say? She says, doesn't it look like my results show this? Doesn't it seem like Einstein did this? Okay? In other words, instead of saying, Einstein, has a theory of relativity, my results show this, she asked it as a question. In other words, what was the message, okay? And the author, since then, has done a lot of research on this. It's really a fascinating subject. I never thought of it. I mean, I've had my students talking in class for years, but it's really interesting. He says like this, a woman who's very smart will tend to use question marks at the end of a lot of things that she says. When she's smart, that everybody knows she's smart, okay? Because she doesn't want to overpower everyone around, particularly men, by showing how smart she is. So by using a question mark, she makes herself a little dumb, okay? That's what he says. A man in authority who does not want to exercise his authority all the time. He wants to come over as soft and tender, okay? Even though he's the boss, he might say, don't you think we should close the office today at 5 o'clock? Okay? Instead of saying, let's close the office at 5. Okay? In other words, he's the authority, but, he's nicer if he asks it as a question mark. So this is brand new. This is only in the last few years this whole topic has come up. I didn't even realize it existed. There's an article in, if any of you get Business Week, had an article about it, and the research, as I said, just a few years old. This use of question marks in order to make you look more like the average, not too smart or not too authoritarian. Okay, let's leave it at that, and maybe we'll answer some questions later.